I still remember that night as if it happened yesterday. 15 years of marriage, and I thought I knew everything about her. Every smile, every silence. We were sitting in the kitchen, half eating dinner on the table, rain tapping the window. She was quiet, too quiet. And when she finally spoke, her voice didn't sound like haze anymore. She said, "I'm going back to someone I used to love." At first I laughed, thinking she was joking, but her eyes didn't move. Then she said, "I never really loved you." Everything inside me went still. I didn't shout. I didn't ask who. I just watched the steam rise from the food and felt the room shrink. 15 years, birthdays, holidays, promises, suddenly looked like props in a play I hadn't written. She waited for me to explode, but I only nodded. "All right," I said, because what else do you say when the person you built a life with tells you it was never real? She tried to explain. Something about how she felt trapped, how her heart had always belonged somewhere else. I heard words, but not meaning. My head buzzed like static. When she finally stopped talking, I stood up, took our plates to the sink, and washed them one by one. She whispered, "Aren't you going to say anything?" I said, "No point. You've already said it all." That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I could hear her breathing beside me, calm, steady, like nothing had broken. Around 3 in the morning she turned over and said, "You're being cold." I said, "You took warmth with you." She sighed and went back to sleep. I stayed until dawn, wondering how love can die so quietly. The next morning she packed a small suitcase. I asked where she was going. She said, "To clear my head." I just nodded again. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice flat. "Take your time." When the door closed behind her, the house sounded empty in a new way. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that hums in your bones. I walked through every room, touching the furniture we chose together. The framed photo from our wedding looked wrong, like a memory borrowed from someone else. I sat on the edge of the bed and whispered, "What did I miss?" Maybe the signs were always there. Late nights at work, messages she wouldn't explain, the distance she called stress. I thought love could survive silence. I was wrong. That evening she texted, "Don't wait up. I'll stay with a friend." I didn't ask which friend. I just typed, "Okay." The word looked small on the screen. I left the phone face down and went outside. The street was wet, the air cold, the world still moving as if nothing had changed. Days turned into a week. She came home once to collect clothes. She smiled politely, like a guest. I asked, "Are you happy?" She said, "I'm trying to be." I nodded again. It became my habit, nodding instead of feeling. When she left, I sat by the window until night fell. Every car light looked like a memory driving away. I started noticing how quiet the house had become. Even the clock sounded louder. I cooked for one, ate half, saved the rest though I didn't know why. I kept checking my phone, not hoping for her message, but fearing it. Each day felt heavier, as if time itself was disappointed in me. Then one afternoon she called. Her voice was soft, familiar, dangerous. "Can we meet?" she asked. I said yes, though I already knew what she'd say. We met at a cafe near the river. She looked the same, but smaller somehow, like someone wearing regret. She said, "I've made a mistake." I waited. She said the man she thought she loved hadn't changed. He's still who he was 15 years ago. Selfish, restless. She looked at me. I thought I'd feel free, but I don't. I sipped my coffee and said nothing. "I want to come home," she whispered. The word home cut deeper than goodbye. I asked, "Home, or back to comfort?" She didn't answer. People around us laughed. Spoons clinked. Life went on. I stood up and said, "You left me while I was still loving you. That's something I don't know how to fix." I walked away before she could reply. That night, she came to the house. I saw her suitcase by the door. She said, "Please, just let me stay for a while." I wanted to say no, but my heart betrayed me. I let her in. She cried on the sofa, saying she was lost. I made her tea because that's what I always did when she was sad. We didn't speak much. I just watched her cry and thought how strange it is to comfort the person who broke you. When she fell asleep, I looked at her and realized something. Forgiveness isn't about taking someone back. That it's about freeing yourself from the weight of their choices. I covered her with a blanket and went to the spare room. For the first time, I didn't dream about her. In the morning, I wrote her a note. "You can stay until you find where you really belong. But I won't wait this time." I left it on the table and went for a long walk by the river. The water moved fast, carrying leaves that had already let go. I understood them. That was the beginning of my peace, not the end of my marriage. Because sometimes peace comes quietly, After the storm decides you're not worth chasing anymore. The next morning the house felt hollow. The note I'd left for her was still on the table, my handwriting crooked from tired hands. The rain had stopped during the night, and weak sunlight was pushing through the blinds. I made coffee and watched the steam rise until it disappeared. It felt like watching the last bit of warmth leave the room. For the first time in years, the air was mine alone. The silence used to scare me. That morning it felt different, unfamiliar but clean. I walked from room to room touching the walls, the photo frames, the small dents on the door where we used to bump it with shopping bags. Everything looked exactly the same but sounded different, like the house was learning to breathe again. Days passed without a call. I started leaving earlier for work, staying later, just to avoid coming back to the echo. Each evening I walked by the canal, hands in my pockets, counting the reflections of street lamps on the water. The air was cold enough to sting my face, and that sting made me feel alive again. Sometimes I'd see couples holding hands, arguing softly, laughing again 5 steps later. I'd smile at that, proof that love could survive small storms even if mine hadn't. A week later my phone lit up with her name. I stayed at it until it stopped ringing. 10 minutes later she texted, "Can we talk?" I typed "not tonight" and set the phone face down. My heart raced anyway. Old habits don't leave easily. That weekend I finally said yes. We met in a park halfway between our places. She looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from chasing the wrong piece. Her voice shook when she said, "I ended it." I nodded because that's what I do when words feel too heavy. She went on about how she thought freedom would fix everything, how she'd realized too late that it only made her smaller. When she said she wanted to come home, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "You left because you didn't love me," I said. "What's changed?" She looked down. Maybe I was wrong. I told her that maybe isn't enough to rebuild a life. She cried. People walk by pretending not to notice. When she reached out, I stepped back. "You taught me what endings sound like," I said. "Now you need to learn what silence feels like." Then I walked away before she could reply. The days after that meeting felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because the guessing was over. Heavier because finality always weighs more than hope. I cleaned the kitchen from top to bottom, fixed a leaking tap, and rearranged the living room. Each small job felt like reclaiming space. The bed still smelled like her shampoo. I changed the sheets twice just to be sure. I began running in the mornings, slow at first, then faster as the cold air burned my lungs. It became a kind of therapy. I'd watch the city wake up around me, buses rattling by, newsagents unlocking doors, kids dragging school bags. And I'd think, life carries on whether your heart agrees or not. One evening, on my way back from the shop, I saw our old wedding photo lying face down in the hallway where it had fallen from the shelf. The glass wasn't cracked, just dusty. I picked it up, looked at our younger selves smiling at a future that never happened, and whispered, "Thank you for trying." Then I put it away in a drawer and closed it. A few days later she texted again, "I miss us." I stared at it until the screen dimmed. I typed back, "There's no us anymore. Take care of yourself." Then I muted the thread. My fingers trembled after I hit send, but there was relief underneath the shake. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. The sound of birds before sunrise, the smell of rain on tarmac, the way the street lights flickered just before switching off. Small things, ordinary things. It's funny how you miss them when you're busy trying to fix someone else's storm. Then came the letter, the real paper kind. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. She wrote that she'd moved in with her sister in another city, that she was trying to start over. "I know you won't want to hear from me again," she said, "but thank you for being kind when I wasn't." I read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope. I didn't burn it yet. I left it on the mantel like a reminder that some chapters end quietly. Weeks turned into months. The house began to feel like mine, not ours. I repainted the hallway a lighter color, planted herbs on the kitchen windowsill, even bought new curtains. Every small change made the old memories fade a little more. One Saturday in early spring, I stepped out to buy milk and ended up at the market instead. The place buzzed with chatter, the kind that hums through you when you've spent too many evenings alone. I bought fruit I didn't need, just for the conversation. That's where I met Grace. She was new to the area, holding 2 heavy bags and pretending they weren't heavy at all. I offered to help. She laughed and said, "You look like someone who fixes things." I told her I was learning. We walked the same way for a bit, talking about nothing important. She asked if the local coffee shop was any good. I said, "Only if you don't mind strong tea served as coffee." She laughed again, the kind of laugh that doesn't carry guilt behind it. When we reached her street, she thanked me and said, "See you around, neighbor." I went home thinking maybe I finally wanted to be seen. Days turned into weeks. I'd see her at the shops or walking her dog. Small hellos grew into real conversations. She told me about her work at the library, about how she loved stories because they always found a way to end, even the sad ones. I told her I wasn't much of a reader anymore, that I preferred living quietly. She said, "Quiet's fine, as long as you still listen for the good bits." I didn't plan on letting anyone close again, but Grace had a calm that made silence comfortable instead of heavy. We'd sit on a bench near the canal where I used to walk alone, sharing chips, watching the reflection of the bridge ripple whenever a boat passed. She never asked about my past, and I never offered. It was enough to sit there, breathing the same cool air, knowing the world still had room for gentle things. One evening she dropped by with soup when she heard I'd caught the flu. "Don't act brave," she said. "Even strong people need looking after." That line stayed with me. For years I'd been the one who carried others. Maybe it was time to let someone carry me, even just for a while. As the weeks passed, I realized peace wasn't something that waited at the end of heartbreak. It was something you built, one small kindness at a time. Grace reminded me of that. She didn't fill the silence. She made it softer. Then, one rainy Thursday, a letter came. Same handwriting, different city on the stamp. It was from my ex-wife. She wrote that she'd been in therapy, that she was learning how to be alone without calling it loneliness. She said she hoped I was happy, that she'd finally understood what I meant by peace. "You deserved better than my confusion," she wrote. "I'm sorry I made you doubt yourself." I read it 3 times, waiting for anger, but none came. Just a quiet sadness for two people who had tried and failed to love each other the right way. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and left it there. It didn't need to bane this time. It had already turned to ash in my memory. That weekend Grace and I drove to the coast. The sea was rough, wind cold enough to steal your breath, but it felt honest, untamed and alive. We walked barefoot on the wet sand until the tide chased us back. She looked at me and said, "You're somewhere else in your head, aren't you?" I nodded, just thinking how everything changes. Even the sea never looks the same twice. She smiled. "That's why it's beautiful." On the drive home, she hummed softly to the radio, off-key but warm. I thought about how laughter had once been a weapon in my house, and how now it sounded like music again. I reached over, rested my hand on Hayes. She didn't move away. Months passed like that. Simple, steady, kind. Some nights we'd sit in the garden with mugs of tea, talking about old TV shows, about the future in small, cautious ways. One evening she said, "Do you ever miss her?" I thought about it and said, "Sometimes, but not in the way you think. I miss who I was when I believed forever was easy." She nodded. "That's honest." Not long after, I drove past a cafe by the river, the same one where my marriage had finally cracked. I parked and went inside. The same tables, the same soft light, but everything felt smaller now. I ordered tea, sat by the window, and watched the river move. Back then it had looked like something carrying my life away. Now it looked like something that had simply kept flowing until I learned to follow it. I pulled out my phone and saw a message from Grace. "Don't forget we're meeting my friends at 8. And wear the nice shirt, the one that makes you look less serious." I laughed quietly, paid the bill, and stepped back into the night. The bridge light shimmered on the water, and for the first time in years, I felt completely present. I won't pretend everything healed perfectly. Some nights memories still creep in, soft and persistent, but they don't hurt the way they used to. They just remind me of how far I've come. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean reunion, and peace doesn't mean silence. It means choosing not to live inside yesterday's noise. If you told me a year ago that I'd be standing here smiling at my own reflection in a cafe window, I'd have called you mad. But maybe that's how healing works. Slow, stubborn, unnoticed until one morning you wake up and realize you're not waiting for anything anymore. Grace once said stories end so new ones can begin. Maybe she's right. My old story ended the night she said she never loved me. My new one started when I decided I still loved life anyway. As I walk home, the streetlights flicker on, the air smells like rain, and somewhere in the distance a train hums through the city. It's a small sound, but it feels like hope. Because sometimes the real comeback isn't finding someone new. It's finding yourself after you thought you were lost for good. And when you do, even the quiet feels like music again.